in September by Jan Hawken. Our Ecological Options Network anchor point for all the issues we work on is preservation of the integrity of the planetary genome, including the human DNA. So when the triple meltdowns and explosions happened at Fukushima Daiichi in 2011, we were horrified and heartbroken at the destruction it unleashed on a planetary scale. Millions of curies of radioactivity were released then, and since then, tons more radioactive water is being dumped daily into the Pacific. Ever-increasing accumulation of radioactivity is affecting all ocean life and all those surrounding it and dependent on it. So our horror turned to resolve to do everything we could to prevent a similar disaster from happening here in California, where we had 2 operating reactor sites along the coast, each surrounded by earthquake faults and in tsunami and flooding zones, just as in Fukushima, Japan. At first, we focused on both Diablo Canyon as well as San Onofre, but San Onofre's story unfolded first. Now, as everyone probably knows, Diablo Canyon is in a critical stage, desperately needing help to get it shut down. Miraculously, at San Onofre, the brave activists' focused efforts and others behind the scenes got their leaking reactors closed. June 7th of this year, just a couple of days ago, was the 11th anniversary of the shutdown. The people power interactions of the folks that we documented over the years showed that the so-called regulatory agencies on both federal and state levels to be far more supportive of the interests of the nuclear industry than that of public health and safety, and it's becoming more so. We also see the national and international syndrome exposed, the dire conundrum of how to manage the intensely radioactive fuel rods that are lethal for millions of years, yet now are carelessly put into containers that last only a few decades, with no plan to deal with any problems that might happen. Up to now, the ethical, social, and environmental justice issues and technological challenges that appropriate handling of this waste must entail have not been reported upon adequately or given the resources and priority required to prevent massive destruction to planetary DNA. Therefore, many thanks to you for all in the audience for being willing to take the bull by the tail and look the situation squarely in the face by watching SOS and by participating in this webinar. Our aim with SOS is to raise awareness and to catalyze action on this existential threat to our species. And we're delighted and grateful to be joined by our longtime friends, mentors, and colleagues here on this panel today. Jim?
Well, thanks to everybody for taking part in this. It's a very important issue that we're all dealing with. At this moment in time where there's a rising panic in Europe at Russia's response to NATO's provocative actions, which seem to be imperiling the possibility, the nuclear exchange with Russia. At the last COP climate change climate conference or summit, over 20 nuclear nations and their allies and vassal states pledged to triple their nuclear capacities by the year 2050. Now, this is at a time when nearly 13,000 nuclear weapons are stockpiled around the world, and countries are working to increase their nuclear weapons accuracy, use, and destructive power. As UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has warned, This is a recipe for annihilation. MAD, remember MAD, mutually assured destruction, as a quote unquote deterrent strategy, is clearly a psychopathic delusion, as is the current push to extend the operation of aged reactors, even restart shutdown ones, and deploy thousands of small modular nuclear reactors around the country by 2050, even though no SMNR has yet made it off the drawing board. We call it crackpot nuclear revivalism. It's a cult based on blind faith, not evidence. It indicates the powerful influence of a powerful public-private partnership that is one part business and one part war, known officially as the nuclear enterprise. We call it the crackpot nuclear military industrial complex. It consists of the nuclear energy, nuclear weapons, and nuclear waste management sectors, which share a supportive manufacturing, transport, educational, and economic infrastructure on which they are all dependent. As French President Emmanuel Macron has admitted, quote, "Without civilian nuclear energy, there is no military use of this technology, and without military use, there is no civilian nuclear energy." For decades, starting with the Atoms for Peace propaganda, officials have denied any connection between commercial nuclear energy and nuclear weapons. Now they cite that very connection as the rationale for subsidizing nuclear technology in all its forms. Former Energy Secretary Ernest Moniz, kind of a high priest of the Church of Nuclear Revivalism, he's emphasized the importance of maintaining the nuclear navy, the spear tip of U.S. global power projection. This crackpot nuclear complex is inextricably entwined with the permanent war economy. Together, their entwined tentacles penetrate every nook and cranny of our society. This is the widest context and implications of what we have termed in our documentary title, the San Onofre Syndrome, and it is the backdrop of our discussion today. Thanks to Mike, the Sierra Club people, and all of you distinguished folks for being here.
Thank you, Jim and Mary Beth. Gordon Edwards is a Canadian mathematician and physicist. He has served as a nuclear consultant to governmental and non-governmental organizations for over 40 years. He is a co-founder and president of the Canadian Coalition for Nuclear Responsibility, a leading independent source of information on nuclear issues of all kinds, both civilian and military. Gordon, welcome.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I'm going to share my screen because I want to show a few slides here. Just have to get it going. This is a nuclear fuel bundle in a Canadian nuclear reactor. It's only about the size of a fireplace log. It's much smaller than the fuel bundles that for the San Onofre plant, but it's the same material. It's uranium inside, and uranium is a naturally occurring radioactive material, but the radioactivity is not very powerful. You can handle this safely for short periods of time. But once it comes out of the reactor, it is millions of times more radioactive than when it went in. And that's because inside the fuel bundle, there are hundreds of new radioactive materials created that were never there before. So usually when we talk about waste, we think about leftovers, but these are not leftovers. These are newly created radioactive poisons, which because of their radioactivity, it means that the atoms themselves are unstable and they disintegrate or explode. And it's the explosions of those atoms that actually endanger living cells and makes them grow in an imperfect way so that you can have developments of cancers many years later, or you can have damage to the eggs or sperm, the reproductive cells, which leads to genetic damage, which can be transmitted to children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and so on down the line. So this is what really makes nuclear power dangerous, is the creation of all this tremendous mixture of radioactive materials that are highly toxic. Now, what happened at San Onofre is that the radioactivity released from the steam generators led to a warning signal for the population that this plant was endangering the environment. So one wonders, how on earth did the radioactivity get out through the steam generators, out into the atmosphere? And the reason is because these bundles leak. They have little cracks, little pinholes, and radioactive materials leak out of them, and they go to the steam generators, which are basically boilers, and from there they go out into the atmosphere mixed with ordinary steam. So that's what led to the warning signal that led to the shutdown of the San Onofre plant. Now, inside these fuel bundles, inside these fuel assemblies, all those radioactive poisons enter into the food chain, into the drinking water, into the air we breathe, and consequently into human beings. And it's there that the damage is done. So it's very necessary to keep these materials out of the environment of living things, literally for millions of years. Of course, we don't know how to do that. We've never been able to do that. In fact, the human race, the human civilization has only existed for 5 or 6 or 7,000 years maximum. And so we're talking about incredible lengths of time that defy human imagination. Now, one of the things that we, Canadian Coalition for Nuclear Responsibility, believe is that we should not abandon these materials. They're too dangerous. We have to keep an eye on them. We owe it to future generations to make sure that they know how to look after themselves, and they know how to monitor this material, how to retrieve it if necessary so that it can be repackaged. We do know how to package it safely for short periods of time, even for decades, but we don't know how to package it forever. And consequently, we need to regard it as an intergenerational problem. Meanwhile, we should stop producing the material because we're just making the problem worser and worser. Now, the worst thing that you can do with regard to the fuel assemblies is to actually destroy them completely. Because when you must think of these fuel assemblies not as the radioactive waste, but the containers of the radioactive waste. It's inside those fuel assemblies that these hundreds of radioactive materials exist. And if you crack the waste canisters, if you crack the fuel bundles and the fuel rods, you allow those materials to escape. When the military wanted to get plutonium for bombs, because plutonium is also created inside the nuclear reactor, it's one of those man-made radioactive materials that was not found in nature before 1939, and it's a very powerful nuclear explosive. This is at Hanford, Washington. The cost of cleanup at Hanford, Washington, cleanup meaning just simply trying to get the radioactive materials contained in such a way that they won't contaminate everything in sight. The estimated cost, according to the U.S. General Accounting Office in 2023, is $300 billion to $640 billion. Can you imagine? This is what happens when we do not safely contain these materials. That's why we have to really bend every effort to make sure that they are safely contained. We cannot leave this to the industry because the industry wants to simply shorten their liability by abandoning this waste. They want to abandon it. That's criminal. If they abandon it, it simply says it's no longer our problem, it's your problem. Now, when these materials get into the human body, they have many different pathways depending upon the chemical characteristics of the radioactive materials. For example, radioactive iodine goes to the thyroid gland. There were 5,000 children in Belarus who had to have their thyroid glands surgically removed because of radioactive iodine given off by the Chernobyl accident in Ukraine. Similarly, we have strontium-90, which goes to the bones and causes bone cancer and blood cancers. And strontium-90 is also given off. Cesium-137 goes to the muscle tissue, and it contaminates the food in such a way, for example, the sheep in northern England, believe it or not, could not be sold for 20 years after the Chernobyl accident because of contamination of the soil, which led to contamination of the grass, which led to contamination of the sheep, which meant the sheep meat could not be sold for human consumption. So this is what happens when these radioactive materials are allowed to escape. Now, the targets of low-level radiation exposure are populations. The larger the population dose, the greater the damage. So here we have a small population. Radioactive materials get into the clouds, they get into the soil, they get into the fish, the meat, the vegetables, and of course, into the humans. And some of those humans, science has shown us that a small percentage of those humans will develop cancers or other diseases. And women and children are particularly vulnerable. Infants and children are particularly vulnerable. Women are about twice as vulnerable as men. If a larger population is exposed to the very same level of contamination, we say that the population dose is greater. And because of that, you get more cancers. So it's proportional to the size of the population being exposed. Now, since these materials, some of them have half-lives that go on for hundreds or thousands or even millions of years, that means that generation after generation after generation of people are going to experience these dangers as time goes on. Now, I'm going to stop my share and just see if I have any time left. I think I've used up my time. I'll simply conclude by saying that the real product of nuclear power reactors are radioactive waste, which lasts for millions of years. All we get is a few decades of electricity in exchange for a million-year headache. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gordon. Donna Gilmore is a systems analyst and founder of San Onofre Safety.org, SOS, a website that provides factual governmental and scientific information on nuclear safety issues at San Onofre and other locations. This includes safety issues related to nuclear reactors, nuclear waste storage and nuclear waste transport, and their consequences and potential solutions. The SOS website is used around the world by journalists, engineers, elected officials, regulators, and the public for creditable sourced information on nuclear safety issues. Gilmore has over 30 years of experience in systems analysis and information technology project management, including the design and implementation of major technology systems for the state of California and the management of a large engineering data center. Donna, welcome.
Okay, thank you, Cindy. Thanks everybody for showing up. I'm going to do, Gordon is right, everything he said, and I'm going to do, whoops, wrong screen. So I'm going to, why isn't this showing up? Okay. So the waste isn't even safely stored right now. The containers that Southern California Edison is using and just about every other reactor facility in the country are using these thin wall canisters. They're 1/2 inch to 5/8 inch thick is all. The rest of the world is using thick wall casks that are 10 to over 19 inches thick. Here, the thin one is on the top, and the thick one, you can see this is a German model castor on the bottom. Canada is using thin wall systems also. I attended a 2014 meeting with the NRC where the engineer told me that these canisters were vulnerable to cracking and they had no idea how to find the cracks. And when I asked them, you know, what are you going to do if you find a crack? The manager said, well, you know, that's one of the challenges here at the NRC. And this was back in 2014, and nothing has changed other than just having a cover up and pretending they can inspect these canisters. So the only option the nuclear industry and the NRC have left us with is to repackage all these canisters into thick wall casks that don't have any of these problems. As you can see with the thick wall, you can repair, you can inspect, you can monitor in a way to prevent leaks. In reality, these canisters that we have, they don't stop a lot of the radiation, and we have radiation they're stored in a concrete overpacks, but there's air vents, and there's radiation being released through those air vents 24/7, and the NRC and the utilities are complicit in hiding what's actually coming out of those air vents. The German model here, and there's also a French model, they don't need air vents, and they block the radiation. The NRC is ignoring its own safety regulations. They're ignoring the ASME, which are American standards for pressure vessels. They're ignoring those standards in order to approve these inferior containers. And in terms of transportability, the plan for transport, if they find a place, and if the canisters arrive leaking at the new destination, you're not going to believe this. The plan is return to sender. So they have no plan to deal with these canisters at the site, and they have no plan if one was to be transported. And in terms of this idea of there's over 4,000 of these canisters in the country right now. And a lot of people are concerned about the location of the containers and thinking that if the containers get moved somewhere else, that's going to be safe. Well, that's not true. But the nuclear industry wants you to believe if you just pass these modifications to the Nuclear Waste Technical Review Board, such as the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, that we will be able to move the waste somewhere else. But hidden in that over 50-page bill is one little piece that nobody seems to have noticed. It allows the federal government to own the waste right at the existing location. And that's really the agenda of the nuclear industry, is to get the bill passed, and then they can get rid of this mess they created. On sanonofresafety.org, I have a lot of information about this. I have information on health risks and all other kinds of information that you might find useful. And okay, so I'm going to switch to the.
You have 2 minutes, Donna. 2 minutes.
Okay, fine. That's good. Okay, so I'm going to switch to reactors now. So most people are not aware that every reactor has to release radiation just to operate 24/7. There was a German study where they found children living around the nuclear plants there. They had over twice the rate of childhood leukemia. So you don't need a Fukushima or a Chernobyl. So the idea that these are clean, I mean, to me, if people knew that whether it's a small modular reactor or keeping the old ones running, people need to know that these are not clean and they're continually releasing radiation, and we really don't know the amount. They call it a LARA, which means as low as reasonably achievable. So in the fight to shut the reactor down, I want to mention what motivated the city council people and others to support the shutdown is we had a chart from the government that showed we were not going to have blackouts. We had a 40% surplus of energy, so we didn't need to. What people really care about is, am I going to have electricity? And for your own area, if you can find a government document that shows that you have enough energy without the nuclear plant, then that's the strongest way you can get elected officials and others to support a shutdown. That was a key effort. And I want to thank Friends of the Earth. They helped. They got into this. We started it and got media attention because we had city council resolutions, and then Friends of the Earth came in and really helped to help with the shutdown efforts. They were the only anti-nuclear group that were helpful to us at San Onofre. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Donna. Next, we have Rose Gardner. She is a co-founder for Alliance for Environmental Strategies.
What's going on here? Wait a minute. Oh, I've got to unshare my. Sorry, I forgot to unshare my screen. Sorry.
And again, thank you, Donna. So next we have Rose Gardner. She is a co-founder for Alliance for Environmental Strategies that worked with other groups in the New Mexico and Texas area in opposing two companies, Waste Control Specialists and Holtec International, who wanted licenses to build high-level nuclear waste dumps within 35 miles from her hometown in Eunice, New Mexico. Although NRC licenses were issued to both, the courts vacated both licenses. Congratulations, Rose, and welcome.
Thank you very much. Trying to get video here, sorry. I've been having issues with Zoom lately. I don't know. Can you help me get video?
Just talk, Rose, just talk.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. All right.
Miriam.
Listen, I'm from Eunice, New Mexico, down here in the southeast corner of New Mexico, right on the Texas state line. About 5 miles from Waste Control and about, like you said, 35 from WIC, and also from the Holtec proposed waste site. Recently, there's been a lot of activity just outside of town here at WCS. Most recently, they brought in, I believe it's a nuclear reactor from a decommissioned plant. It traveled through Texas, came down the roads on this huge trailer with lots of wheels on it. Traffic had to be stopped just east of town to let this monster come in. I saw other pictures on Facebook that showed it traveling, I believe, near Brownwood, Texas. So the low-level nuclear waste license that WCS has, they're taking very, very, a lot of activity. Our railroad that runs right through town that brings the waste through the rails from Texas and other places is very busy night and day. So thanks to that low-level nuclear waste license, we've got, I think there's no deadline. If I'm not mistaken, we're going to listen to this go on for at least the rest of my lifetime. The whole idea of nuclear waste being brought here to Eunice, and I say Eunice because it's right outside town, it was very frightening. But through legal battles promoted in Texas, they were able to, even though the license were issued to waste control specialists for the high level waste, it was vacated, but they're going to appeal that, right? And the same thing happened with Holtec, which got their license to build their high level nuclear waste site right next to the highway where WIP is. But anyway, that was vacated. So that made me very happy, but they're going to try to appeal it as well. The only people that were really upset about it was ELIA, the Energy Alliance that supported Holtec coming in to New Mexico. A couple of legislators made a couple comments that there wasn't a whole lot of pushback. Now, it's a positive and good thing for us, but we have to make sure that Nuclear Waste Policy Act doesn't get changed. And that's the whole thing that will open the doors, that no matter if a license is being vacated, if they're allowed to move and take title of this nuclear waste, they can put it anywhere. So we need to watch that and be careful of what's going on. I feel like the film, this SOS, was so good. It really showed everything from how we got from the beginning to now, and so it's like a wonderful film. I watched it and a couple of days ago, and it tells a story, and I'm very thankful to Mary Beth and Jim for putting that out there. I'm thankful to Sierra Club for helping. Oh gosh, they're everywhere. What would we do without the Sierra Club? And anyone else involved in getting the message out that it's not over. We still have a lot of work to do. In the film, it shows like I'm indignant. I am. This stuff is coming here. It's here, guys. If a reactor isn't high level waste, I don't know what is. So help us. We all need to be helped. Yeah, we're a voice, but we need help. We need more action. We need people to get their heads up and look, see what's going on in your town. How can you get involved? Just helping promote maybe this film and the next one. We can do something, make a better world of what's left, because this stuff's not going away. And so if we have to deal with it, let's fight it tooth and nail. Anyway, that's all I have. And so far, the other panelists have given us a lot of information, and thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Rose, and thank you for reminding us that this is about a lot more than just the technical aspects of what's going on, that there are whole communities that are affected by this technology, and they are across the entire United States and in fact across the world. So thank you so much. Diane Dorigo has degrees in chemistry and environmental studies, and she's the Radioactive Waste Project Director at Nuclear Information and Resource Service, NIRS, and is a member of the Sierra Club Nuclear Free Campaign core team. She worked for the Sierra Club Radioactive Waste Campaign based in Buffalo for several years, and is a community organizer and researcher at other public interest and environmental groups in New York State. Starting with the West Valley Nuclear Waste Site, she has closely tracked nuclear waste issues for decades, including high-level and so-called low-level commercial and weapons waste, leaking burial grounds, and the increasing threat of irradiated fuel reprocessing. She has repeatedly challenged unnecessary nuclear waste transport and has coordinated national and international opposition to deregulating nuclear waste that would allow it to be dumped as regular trash or made into everyday household items. Diane, welcome.
Thanks. And thanks to Mary Beth and Jim for your massive effort on getting this film completed, this documentary. What I love about it is that it makes the case that we all, I think, who are critics here, agree that stopping producing more nuclear waste is really the only step forward, that is the best step forward. When you're digging a hole, you don't want to just keep digging and digging. We need to stop making it. And I also greatly appreciate that it points out and emphasizes the dangers from supposedly centralized interim storage. It's true that every reactor site in the country is a interim storage site for high level, low level radioactive waste, and that a consolidated interim storage site only makes it worse. It would be super if we could just get this stuff out of these dangerous places, and San Onofre is one of the worst, earthquake-wise, water-wise, and in many ways, it's one of the most dangerous sites. But every reactor site is in a dangerous predicament, and every community with these reactors need to share the information that they have about the dangers that they're facing with any new communities that are considering supporting new nuclear. So I appreciate that the film makes it clear that stop making more and this consolidated interim storage site is nonsense, and that we need to manage what we've got as best we can. One of the things that we're all struggling with, of course, if it were left to its own devices, there would be no new nuclear. There would be no money for nuclear. Even Bill Gates is groveling for federal money. He doesn't want to spend his money on his new nukes that he wants to build. And the nuclear waste problem, as Gordon pointed out, is truly a technical, a physical challenge. It is not solved. There is no way to isolate anything for as long as it remains radioactive. And so the best we can do is to recontainerize it and pass it on to future generations in a way that they can then recontainerize it. However, there is certainly a legitimate push and call for a permanent repository. Unfortunately, that would probably be in a poor community or a disadvantaged community, and it would not necessarily isolate the waste forever. And this is one of the really tough issues that we don't have an answer to. How can this stuff be truly isolated for as long as it remains dangerous? There may be some compromises needed, because it's certainly not going to be able to be isolated forever at every reactor site in the US. And even worse is if we pretend that consolidated storage is okay, and then we start moving it, it would take 40 years or more to move all of the waste at reactors to another location. And then if it's a temporary site, it would have to move again. So I appreciate that the film points out the fallacy of relying on consolidated interim storage. And of course, I should point out that Yucca Mountain, which was chosen by political means and canceled because of the technical problems, should be off the table. That both CIS and Yucca Mountain should be off the table. So what is the situation, though? Who makes these decisions? It unfortunately, or fortunately, I mean, we supposedly live in a democracy, but Congress is where the rules are made. And the Nuclear Waste Policy Act does have a plan for how to find a repository. It unfortunately doesn't have a plan for stopping making more. And our Congress just voted, the House of Representatives voted 393 to 13 to support new nuclear power, to support advanced, quote unquote, advanced fuel, which could mean HALEU, high assay low enriched uranium, which is actually almost to bomb grade. And it pushed for the bill that it passed would encourage export of nuclear. 2 minutes?
2 minutes.
Okay. Export of nuclear technology to other countries. And it would tell the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to change its focus from regulating to promoting nuclear power. So we are in a situation with Congress, and when it has not come to the floor in the Senate, and let's try to prevent that. That's S870. We're in a situation where the nuclear industry basically owns and runs Congress, and we need to continue to fight back on that to the best of our ability. I want to point out that the Tim Judson, my director at NEARS, has done a terrific analysis of how the $41.3 billion in nuclear subsidies was basically bought by nuclear industry lobbyists. The amount of lobbying that was done by First Energy and Entergy and the Nuclear Energy Institute and the and other consortia put enormous amounts of money, timed perfectly, to get certain bills and sponsors in place. This is something we all who work on this issue know, but Tim has actually identified which campaign contributions happened on which days, and which days the bills were introduced in Congress for the nuclear industry. And the two bills that were supposed to be so great for climate, Build Back Better and the bipartisan infrastructure, those bills actually gave more money to nuclear power and carbon sequestration than to renewables, than to wind and solar and the real solutions. So I didn't expect to talk that long, but I had a few more things, and I will deal with it in questions and answers. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Dee. And if people want to ask a question, remember the chat is closed for this event. Please use the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, the Q&A box. And we already have some questions started. I think we should start with someone providing an update on San Onofre. Where are we now? I don't know, Jim and Mary Beth, if you want to address that. And also Donna might be able to address that. If all of the panelists would go ahead and turn on their cameras. Stay silent, though, until you want to answer a question. And if you feel that you want to answer a question that may not have been directed to you, please do raise your hand as a panelist. Thank you so much. And again, updates on San Onofre. Where are we?
Well, they're tearing apart the domes and other things, and they have over 100 thin wall canisters. Some of them have reached the age where they could already have through wall cracking. We have no idea how much radiation is coming out of the air vents, and we don't. There doesn't seem to be support. Most of the people just want it out of there. They don't understand that that's not really going to happen. So yeah, so so I moved. Okay, so I moved away. It took me 3 years to come to terms with the fact that I wasn't going to be able to stop what's going on right now. That doesn't mean we've given up. We're planning to look into ways to work with the state government, not federal, because federal's a lost cause. But that would be something to talk about in the future if it gets some legs. So.
There's another question here. Gordon and Diane, if you would please speak about vitrification attempts for encasing the waste, and is that promising or not?
Do you want me to start with that, Diane? Yeah, I'll start with it. Okay, this is called vitrification. Vitrification refers to glass. It means glass making. If you had radioactive waste in a liquid form, you could melt it in with glass-making materials and cast it into a glass matrix. Now, this glass matrix is called vitrification, and it could be a huge glass log that weighs tons, or it could be a smaller item. However, this is only for dealing with liquid radioactive waste. And by the time the radioactive waste has been turned into a liquid, you've already lost a lot of it. Because in order to get it into a liquid form, you have to, first of all, destroy the fuel assemblies, and you get a lot of gases, radioactive gases coming off. You get radioactive vapors coming off. They had this is called reprocessing. Reprocessing is destroying the fuel bundle for the purposes of extracting plutonium, usually plutonium or some other material that's heavier than uranium. And that used to be done for the purposes of making bombs. There were tens of thousands of nuclear weapons made by reprocessing spent fuel from reactors, military reactors at Hanford, Washington, or at Savannah River, and really at Hanford. And the result of that was that you had these huge tanks. I showed a picture of one earlier, huge tanks of liquid radioactive waste, which have to be constantly stirred. Otherwise, they form a kind of a sludge, and that can cause heat buildup and actually explosion. There was an explosion of one such tank in Russia back in 1957. That's the material they want to vitrify. And if anybody tells you that that's a great way of handling nuclear waste, tell them they got bats in their belfry, because the only way you can get there is by liquefying the high-level radioactive waste to begin with. Who on earth would have would want to do that? It makes it far more difficult to manage. And that's why those horrendous figures, the $300 billion cleanup figures, and the $640 billion cleanup figures for Hanford, Washington, that's why those numbers are so high, is because they liquefied the stuff and now they're trying to save face by vitrifying the results. It's a mess.
Dee, did you want to add?
Yeah, I want to talk about reprocessing a teeny weeny bit here. So what we've got with the radiated fuel, commercial nuclear power fuel, is much more radioactive than the weapons fuel, because the fuel stays in the core of a weapons reactor until the biggest amount, the most amount of plutonium is formed by uranium's absorbing neutrons. And that happens a lot faster than what's going on in the power reactor. In the power reactors, you've got plutonium is forming, but the goal is to split the uraniums, and the binding energy heats the water and turns the turbines and makes the electricity, and they keep it in much, much longer. So over 95% of all the radioactivity in the US nuclear power and weapons inventory is in commercial irradiated fuel. So that's important to know. And then what you're doing when you reprocess is chopping up the fuel assemblies, chopping up the rods, dissolving it in chemicals, and exposing all of those fission products and that plutonium. And the idea is to extract the uranium that hasn't been split yet and the plutonium that formed, but then all the cesiums and strontiums and iodines are all in there. And obviously it becomes one of the hottest places in the world. And around West Valley, I know I want to be quick, I'll stop right after this, but around West Valley, there was a study done by researchers at the University of Rochester, and they looked for iodine 129, which is a long-lasting fission product from splitting uranium. And they found much more iodine 129 in the vicinity, in the region around West Valley up to Rochester and all around Western New York, and I'm not sure if they went into Canada, but that was much more than they found when they looked around nuclear reactor sites. And that's because you're taking the rods and you're actually opening them up. So reprocessing is a big, stupid mistake that if we let them get away with that, I'm going to jump off a bridge.
Just one final word on that subject, if you don't mind, Diane. And that is, in case people are puzzled, there's two things I'll just clarify. The reason reprocessing is a problem is that the nuclear technocrats want to build thousands of reactors. They're crazy, but in order to build thousands of reactors, they're afraid that the uranium fuel is not going to be sufficient. So they want to start reprocessing the spent fuel to get the plutonium to be used as fuel. And that's where all these dangers come from. The West Valley plant that Dee was just talking about was the only commercial reprocessing plant for non-military uses in the United States, and it was a complete disaster because it left a mess behind, which cost billions and billions of dollars more than the plant itself ever cost or could ever provide any benefits for. So when people talk about reprocessing, just bear in mind that they're talking about a scenario that is quite a nightmarish vision of what goes on in the future. They do have new techniques for reprocessing, which are less voluminous and which do not involve as much liquid. They're called pyroprocessing. They're doing this in Idaho at the present time. But don't be fooled. You still have to destroy the fuel bundles, and that means you still have to release all those nasty things like iodine 129, whether it's liquid or whether it's not liquid. It's still a destructive process which releases all those radioactive materials. That did not happen at San Onofre, so it's not something that went on at San Onofre, and hopefully will not.
Mhm.
So there are a few questions here that are asking about how nuclear power can help climate change, or if it can help climate change. Talking about asking questions about the economics versus renewables and efficiency. And along that same vein, there is a question on whether or not nuclear power is carbon neutral. So if someone would like to take those questions and answer them. Donna?
Well, let me tell you what happened at the NRC. The first new reactor, small modular reactor they approved was the NuScale reactor. You know what shut down San Onofre was bad steam generators, right? The NRC approved the NuScale small modular reactor, knowing the steam generator design would not work. You know, I mean, but in the news, you're only going to hear that the NRC approved it. They don't tell you all the things that were wrong with it. You just have a bunch of PowerPoint presentations, people trying to get money. You don't want these new reactors. You need to shut down the reactors we have. They're getting old. They're not maintained well. And to call a nuclear reactor clean is just total propaganda manipulation. So we do not need nuclear. Anything's better than nuclear, number one. We do not need nuclear. You've been sold a bill of goods. Anyway, Gordon probably wants to say something. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to correct something that was said earlier. It said that at the COP28 conference, there were 20 nations that talked about a tripling of nuclear. That was not a COP28 initiative. COP28, for those who don't know, is the climate change conference that took place in November last year. It was 22 countries that were mostly sellers of nuclear power that were trying to drum up business, that used the backdrop, used the photo op of COP28 to announce their intention of tripling nuclear power. But that's not what the COP28 conference came up with. They unanimously recommended a tripling of renewable and a doubling of energy efficiency by 2030, not by 2050. Now, 2030 is only 6 years away. 2050 is 26 years away. So, I mean, that tells you in a nutshell what's wrong with nuclear as a climate strategy. It's way too slow, it's way too expensive, and it's way too dirty. Here in Canada, we call it a dirty, dangerous distraction from climate action, because renewables can be built quickly, they can be deployed quickly, and they're 3 to 4 times cheaper, even with storage, than nuclear. As you can see from Lazard, who's one of the big Wall Street advisors on energy investments. So talking about nuclear for climate change is really only a pipe dream of the nuclear industry. And unfortunately, they have cornered the market with a lot of the politicians. So they've hornswoggled the politicians into thinking that there's no way to net zero without nuclear. On the contrary, the fastest way to reduce climate change is by far through energy efficiency and deployment of renewables with batteries and other storage systems. And there's really some very interesting storage systems, which include seasonal storage. You can store energy for months, not just for weeks or hours. You can store energy for months. In Finland, they have what are called sand batteries, which can store them for an entire season. So this is the way that we should be going in the future. And the bankers told the 22 nations that were pushing nuclear at a nuclear summit in Belgium. They said, there's no way we're going to finance this. There's no way we're going to put up trillions of dollars of investment into this ridiculous nuclear expansion, because you don't have a business case. The only customers you have are credulous governments who are giving you public money, not private investors.
Donna, did you want to add?
Yes. Let me give you the example of Diablo Canyon. So the governor pushed through a bill to extend the life of Diablo Canyon to reactors, claiming that we needed it for reliability. So I researched all the reactor status data for years on Diablo Canyon. It was down. One or both reactors were down 40% of the days in the year for the last 5 years. So it is definitely not reliable, but the lies are being told. One of the reasons it was down, I'll give you an example. They had a corroded saltwater pump, and they just let it ride until it actually shut the reactor down. And the California ISO, our infrastructure for California independent system operator, they said the biggest risk is Diablo Canyon, because you never know when it's going to go down, and then you've got to be able to cover the energy for those reactors. It's very unreliable. And I made a graph. I have a handouts page, and I made a graph showing the bad record. But anyway, so that's all I wanted to share.
My short answer is that, oh, Gordon, you want to go again?
No, I was going to ask Rose a question. So you go ahead, Dee, say whatever you want. And then
I wanted to say that I really do believe we need to say nuclear makes climate worse. Not, oh, it's not good for climate. It makes it worse. It steals the resources for the real solutions. And we've seen that in the Build Back Better Act and in the bipartisan infrastructure. And so it steals the resources, and it maintains a grid that relies on centralized power and makes it harder for renewables to be
right.
moved in and relied upon.
That's
Yeah.
right.
That's absolutely correct. And what happens here is that if you look at the statistics on the world scale, you find that nuclear power has been in steep decline for the last 25 years. The contribution of nuclear to global electricity supply has declined from 17% to less than 10%, and it's still going down, and nobody is saying it's going to reverse itself in the near future. So it's going to continue to go down, because why? There's about 400 reactors operating right now, and they're very old, and the old ones are going to be shut down much faster than the new ones can possibly be built. So what's happening here, in my view, is that the nuclear industry is in bad shape. They need bucks, and they figure there's trillions of dollars on the table to fight climate change. Let's grab as much of that money as we can. And by grabbing that money, they are preventing real climate change, real climate action. And as Diane says precisely, it's actually slowing the fight against climate change. These reactors take so long to build that there's going to be not only no contribution to reducing climate greenhouse gas emissions, but it's going to worsen the situation, because you got to mine the uranium, you got to refine the uranium, you got to build the plants. All of that is going to add to the carbon emissions and not take one bit of carbon away. So this is a failing strategy. It's an industrial strategy that doesn't make any climate sense.
I have a really quick fact. In January of 2024, the International Energy Agency revealed that renewables, solar and wind, the amount of solar and wind that was added in 2023 was more than the amount of nuclear electricity already in the grid. So there were 507 gigawatts of new renewables added, and only about 380 gigawatts of nuclear capacity. So more clean energy was brought online than we already have from nukes.
And please remember, the stuff from nukes is already there for decades. So we're comparing 1 year's growth of renewables swamps all those years of nuclear that have been built up over decades.
I just want to add, thank you so much for all those great comments. And I just wanted to add.
You have to unmute.
No, I'm
we can hear you.
I just wanted to add that this is why we put it in the context with the weapons. That is why they're pushing, not only to keep the industry going, but they want to keep the weapons going. They want to keep the
Mm.
nuclear weapons industry alive, and they're going to be pressing to increase the mess by developing fuel fabrication that is, they're trying to say it's for commercial use, but it's
Closer to weapons, the high assay low enriched uranium, yeah.
right,
Yeah.
right. Mhm.
Yeah, Canada had a terrible experience in 1974. India exploded its first atomic bomb using a Canadian nuclear reactor that we gave them as a gift for peaceful purposes. They used it for peaceful purposes, but they also used it to produce the plutonium for bombs. The only place plutonium comes from is nuclear reactors. And all nuclear reactors, all operating nuclear reactors today produce plutonium as a byproduct. Plutonium has a 24,000-year half-life. No nuclear reactor has more than a few decades of expected lifetime. Like, let's say 60 years, 70 years maximum. The plutonium is there forever. So what we're doing is we're producing we're planting the seeds of our own destruction. That plutonium from any nuclear reactor used today can be used to build bombs thousands of years into the future by regimes that we didn't even imagine. So it's really a very dangerous situation, particularly in today's world, where after reducing nuclear weapons over a period of time from the collapse of the Soviet Empire, we're now modernizing and expanding nuclear forces and saber rattling with nuclear things. This is the worst possible time to increase the supply of plutonium worldwide.
So I want to thank you all for making the weapons power connection. I think it's extremely important, and we've discussed the climate change and how it doesn't impact, and how nuclear power is bad for climate change, worse for climate change, will not help address it. I want to sort of shift us into now the community organizing piece. And the question that I had for Rose, actually, there's a couple of questions for Rose. If you'd like to share any of your community organizing experiences, and there were questions wondering what we can do to help, where our focus should be, what your experience, Rose, in the community has been. Have there been any accidents from the WCS site, or for that matter, any transport accidents? Because we all know that transport accidents occur even if they don't have nuclear waste on them. And just how can people plug in to help? And so I want to hear from Rose first, and then I would like to hear from Dee as well, because I think that there are some organizing things that we can do. There's legislation, etc. So Rose.
Well, it's been a long road. When I first started here in Eunice, my community is around 3,000 people. Not a whole lot of interest. You know, it was a pie in the sky dream for this company, Holtec, and people were actually saying it wasn't going to happen. But see, I learned my lesson the first time around. I was in the fight against Uranco, the uranium enrichment facility that is in Lee County, just outside my town as well. And so we went through a lot of work trying to stop them. You know, Uranco is actually the company that was kicked out of Tennessee and Louisiana, and they found a place here because there was a politician that wanted to bring here. Isn't that the way it works? Politicians, come on, everybody wants you. In reality, it's they want you, they want the company, and nobody knows about it. They don't know what's coming up. So it started there and lost that. So they built their facility. And that's the facility that is going to build that higher level uranium enrichment product that you were talking about, just under bomb grade. So one of the things that I learned there is I met a lot of people locally and in Santa Fe, Albuquerque area. that already had the experience. So yeah, you reach out, you make friends, you start talking, and all of a sudden you realize you have a lot in common. So that's where your organization starts. Somebody has to reach out, because a lot of these companies realize that if they come into your town, you know, people say, oh no, they're outsiders. And that's still the way they're talked about from the northern New Mexico area. They're outsiders. They're from up north. They don't know what's going on here. We're big in oil and gas extraction here. So that's our main industry. And that is actually the company that fought Baskin Oil from Midland, I believe, bought Holtec. And it was their money. It was their desire not to have Holtec make their base here. But at the same time, they came out and said, we're not against nuclear. They said, that's the problem. They're not against nuclear, but they just didn't want it here where their facilities are, where they're making their money. So drawing that distinction, yeah, you make friends, you get along with others, but your allies are the ones that help you group and make strategies and get the ball rolling. Why? Because they've done it before. They know what they're doing. And that's what I learned is reach out to somebody that knows what you're doing. They are happy to help. They want to help because we're all in this together. And so knowing that now, it's like the panelists here, I've met all of y'all. At one point in my life or another, I've seen you, met you, and a lot of it started when we were meeting in our summits in Chicago. And those were exciting for me. So again, it takes, you got to step out of your comfort zone. You got to have you know, an idea of how you feel and what you want done, and then these people will help you. And I hope to do that as well as I go along, because it's not over. If I can help somebody that's starting out, I'll be glad to help you. But at the same time, I'm still going to reach out to the same people that have helped me all along. So that is part of the organizing that I've been involved in. And still, we have an email list that we have calls every month, except for last month. It was kind of vacation time. But every other week, I send out a list to my email list. We have a call Tuesday night, every second and fourth Tuesday. And, you know, we discuss what's current. You want to join, you can. If you don't want to, that's fine. It's a little bit slow right now. Because certainly when we were in the battle, pushing the bill in New Mexico that the legislators passed to stop, well, what they did was they banned the storage of high-level waste in New Mexico. And, you know, I'm very happy to be a part of that, even though it's out here. But I felt like the people that carried it up to the legislators and presented it were more than well qualified, and they knew what they were doing, and it was in their hands, and it worked. I understand it was a victory that not a lot of people don't get, and I'm very, very happy to be part of that.
Mm-hmm.
Rose is also on the core team or the coordinating committee of a national radioactive waste coalition, which we formed to try to build some better political power. And we've got a ways to go with that. But the guiding principles, I'll just run down. There's 6 guiding principles. Stop making nuclear waste, prioritize human health and environmental protection, acknowledge and combat environmental racism and injustice, stop subsidizing the sources of nuclear waste, protect and support communities already adversely affected, and communities must have the first and last say.
Go ahead, Donna.
So
And
regarding New Mexico and Texas, there was a California Supreme Court ruling that explain where even though the states can't regulate radiation related things, everything else they can. And that case, that Supreme Court ruling was one of the things that was used by New Mexico and Texas to stop those two facilities from getting permits. They had legal authority.
So Gordon, I'm gonna let you speak, but I've got an additional question or questions actually for you, and it concerns legacy exposures. I don't think that a lot of people completely understand. I know that the science doesn't understand what legacy exposures are, and as I'm hearing this discussion, I'm realizing that the nuclear technology tends to colonize people again and again and again, and they spew out radioactivity that then colonizes our bodies again and again and again, and you start to build up damage. And so I would like you to discuss, we'll start with Gordon, the fact that nuclear power releases radioactivity as a matter of course, as a matter of operational course, but even after they're shut down, they still want to contaminate. I mean, look at what's going on with Indian Point and Holtec trying to spew out the tritium. And then finally, come full circle around to tritium and carbon-14. Gordon, if you could talk a little bit about those. And then when Gordon's done with that, we can let other people talk to this issue as well. Thanks.
Well, okay. That's a very big, tall order, of course, but I can at least say a few things about it. I just wanted to, with regard to organizing, we have 3 provinces in Canada, which have now, out of 10 provinces, which have banned uranium mining. In Nova Scotia, there's a law against not only uranium mining and exploration, but anybody who is mining for anything that encounters uranium has to stop. So this is a strong law. We have a ban on uranium mining in British Columbia and also in Quebec. Of course, there's a lot of uranium mining that goes on in Saskatchewan. They call it the Saudi Arabia of uranium there. But we found that diversification of your support base is really helpful. If you can get fruit growers and farmers and small businessmen and medical doctors and dietitians and people who come from unsuspecting quarters, not just environmental groups, not just non-governmental groups that would be expected to be concerned about nuclear power, but people who are not expected to be concerned about it. By getting such a diversity in your representation, it really makes the politicians nervous, and it makes the decision makers nervous because they don't know where all this opposition is coming from, and they don't know how big it could grow and how rapidly it could grow. So that's a little trick that we found that's very helpful. We've had a number of success stories, and we'd be glad to share them with people. With regard to this question of the radioactive materials and how long-lived they are, carbon-14 has a 5,700-year life. Now, carbon-14, you've heard of it, of course. It's a radioactive form of carbon. It does exist in nature in very small amounts and helps in dating dinosaur bones and so on. But nuclear power plants produce enormous quantities of carbon-14, radioactive carbon, and also radioactive hydrogen, which is called tritium. And now hydrogen and carbon happen to be the basic building blocks of every organic molecule in your body, including the DNA molecules. All our organic molecules have carbon bases. And so when you put radioactive materials right into the DNA molecules of your body, you're creating a legacy of harm that is really literally incalculable. And with this 5,700-year half-life for carbon-14, you can realize that, well, again, the pyramids of Egypt are only 5,000 years old. So we're talking about a very, very long-term problem. And that's why, even if you shut down all the nuclear reactors, as the San Onofre film shows so well, you haven't really solved the problem, because there's the waste. And it's called waste, but it's actually newly created, hot, dangerous radioactive poisons that are going to remain harmful for a long time. The simple fact is we don't know how to shut off radioactivity. We know how to shut down a nuclear power plant. We know how to stop the fission process. We don't know how to stop radioactivity. And that's why we have this long-term radioactive waste problem. So these legacy issues that you're referring to are very, very real. And we have to really gird our loins and be prepared to deal with the aftermath of the nuclear age, and not just, we have enough of a problem putting an end to the growth of this thing, but that's not going to be the end of the problem. It's going to be a legacy problem. The radioactive legacy of the nuclear age stretches forward timelessly. You know, really, we don't know where, we can't see the end of it. So it may be, don't forget that these wastes, none of these wastes are not any older than I am. These wastes are only less than 80 years old. So we're just at the threshold of the age of nuclear waste, but it stretches out before us in a very long way. We may, in fact, be able to find a way of actually safely neutralizing this stuff in the future. We don't know how to do it now. We don't know if we had a magic way, like a Star Trek transporter booth, that we could put the radioactive waste in and just beam it into the center of the sun, it would be gone. It would be gone for good. It could be burned up. We don't have that technology. But in the meantime, my organization, the Canadian Coalition for Nuclear Responsibility, we believe that we should not be abandoning this waste. We have to keep it. We call it rolling stewardship. It doesn't matter whether it's above ground or below ground. It should be removed from close to the water for sure. It should be, but not necessarily transported over public roads. It should be put into a much more secure location. And we have to have an ongoing commitment long after the last nuclear reactor shut down for society to have the funds, the expertise, the knowledge to actually manage this waste for a long time, certainly for a couple of centuries. I don't know, that'll just start the discussion of the legacy problems of nuclear waste, perhaps. Which, by the way, again, I think the film does a marvelous job of raising that subject in a very thoughtful way.
Thank you. I just want to point out that back to the other point of diversifying your support base, we've been so blessed when our film is being shown in different places. For instance, in Cape Cod, when it was shown there, a board member, and maybe he was the head of the board of the Plymouth Board of Health, became very enthusiastic about using the film to educate. He was appalled at the ignorance of the people in the population who were being affected by the Holtec dumping into the water and the children eating the fish and so on. So, and also the Physicians for Social Responsibility there in Boston are very, a doctor from that board is very enthusiastic. And I was delighted that those health-oriented people were interested and saw the relevance and wanted to use the film. So as an organizing tool. Mm-hmm. And also it's just so fun that Fasken oil and gas is an ally. I just think that's so wonderful. Everybody, when they testified at the NRC meeting in where was that? Not Carlsbad, but in New Mexico, we were all elated. We realized that they could be very, very valuable, and they have been.
So I want to bring it back. Actually, I have a question for you, Diane. Is there any legislation that we should be focusing on right now? Is there anything happening at the national level that we should be plugging into? I know there's the RECA issue. Are there other sorts of bills that we should either be for or against at this point?
Well, I mentioned in my little 7 minutes that that there's a bill that's S870 course, this is June of 2024. I don't know how long S870 will be around, but it does those 4 things of promoting nuclear power, small nuclear reactors, advanced fuel, exporting the materials to other countries, and diverting the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to promotion rather than regulation. And it doesn't really regulate very stringently as it is now. So that bill, as I said, passed the House, and it is potentially coming up in the Senate. So we do need to have a renewed effort to get senators to vote against it. As I mentioned, and I didn't get into the details, the nuclear industry has provided campaign contributions to a lot of the leadership of the Democratic Party. So there's really, it's a bipartisan supported bill in the democratically run Senate. So S870, and then the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act. The effort right now is on getting Speaker of the House Mike Johnson to bring that bill to the floor for a vote. It expires today. The push is to, and it's pretty ironic, I think, that the House would pass almost unanimously a bill for new nuclear and for worse fuel, which will make hotter waste and hotter contamination routine releases, and then refuses to even bring to the floor for a vote a bill that compensates people who have suffered from the nuclear fuel chain as a result of federal government activities. So anyway, the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act is S3853, and we strongly support that. And Speaker Johnson, I believe we've got an alert on the NIRS.org website that has his phone number. There's also a Save RECA website, RECA, for Radiation Exposure Compensation Act. So those are the 2 bills right now. And of course, there will be more. If they get away with this, they'll be back to change the Nuclear Waste Policy Act to legalize consolidated storage. That's the next thing on the agenda. There have been bills in the past. And although Mike Levin is the local representative from this district, he has introduced bills that promote new nuclear, and even I believe one of them even had reprocessing in it. So it's a uphill battle, and we need to wage it.
I believe I read that the RECA bill was sunsetted, but people aren't giving up. I mean, we can, I hope.
Well, they can still vote on it to extend it. I mean, this is the deadline day for it, but the offices that facilitate it are not closing. They're still processing and working with the people who have been compensated. What the bill would do is to keep it going, and it would have been nice to do it by today, but instead of letting it phase out, we're pushing to still, even though the deadline is passing, to bring it to the floor and to extend it and expand it to more exposed, injured people.
Okay, so we can just continue
Keep
on
contacting Speaker
Okay.
Johnson's office to bring HR 3853 RECA to the floor for a vote.
Okay, we'll have all of these on our website as suggested actions, just like NIRS has it on their website too. The San Onofre Syndrome.com.
We can put that in the chat if people need to remember it. So there's a question too, sort of floating around about, these people, the industry comes into communities and they want to know what communities will accept as far as waste storage or disposal or whatever you want to call it. But then it's almost like they're using that in order to make more of it. And so the question is, how and what is the timing on finding something that is not great but acceptable versus having them use that as an excuse to just keep producing more of it, because this becomes a legacy issue as well. And I don't know, Donna, you were nodding your head. I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, I'm those meetings for consent-based siting, it's all a big game. Nobody wants this stuff. But they have to give the impression things are moving forward in order to keep making, keeping the reactors open and starting. I mean, it's not real. They're not going to find anybody. And the fuel rods have been burned in the reactors so long that some of them are, the fuel rods are damaged, and they have no way to inspect them in these thin canisters. So you think you're going to take these highly radioactive brittle fuel rods in brittle canisters and transport them anywhere? And we don't have the transport infrastructure anyway. And I think there was a question I saw about this. Oh, they've got a transport car now, so what? You've got all, there's so many, anytime you hear the word challenge, whether it's your doctor or the nuclear industry, that means these are the things they haven't figured out that they have to figure out. And there's a whole slew of those things. They just don't talk about them.
Gordon.
I'd just like to say that for the first 30 years of the nuclear age, from 1945 to 1975, none of the decision makers nor the general public had any awareness of the fact that nuclear waste existed. And that's because the industry lied about it. They simply, and they still are, they lied about it by saying that nuclear energy is a totally clean source of energy. Clean source of energy means problem-free. And people thought that being scientists and being technical people, they would not be liars, which they are. And so we were saddled with this problem because we were fooled and lied to by the nuclear industry. Now they say, well, we have the waste, we have to do something with it. But in fact, what they have done is they've compounded the first lie with a second lie. And that is that they know what to do with it. They don't know what to do with it. There is no actual solution. What they are proposing is not a solution. It's just an idea. And the purpose of this idea is to cover their tracks about lying in the first place and to allow them to continue producing more nuclear waste forever. They have no intention of ever stopping, which means that even if it were safe, which it isn't, to put it underground in a deep geological repository, as long as you could keep producing at the surface, you have not made the surface any safer at all, because you still have 30 years worth of fuel at every reactor site accumulating right there, ready for any catastrophe that might happen, whether it's a war, whether it's a meteor from outer space, whatever it is. So putting it deep underground is, in words that I'm borrowing from Jim because he mentioned them the other day, and I thought it was just the perfect choice of words. The deep geological repository is the appearance of disappearance. They want to create the appearance of disappearance without actual disappearance. They don't want the waste to disappear. It's their stock and trade. That's their main product, not electricity. It's the nuclear waste. That's their main product. And so it's really a shameful cheat on everybody. And I think that it's very important to reveal the fundamental dishonesty behind this course of events. Now, that's not to say that we don't have to deal with the waste. We do. We're saddled with it. But it doesn't mean we have to keep on producing it.
I think I need to do a clarification. I'm sorry, I put the Advance Act, Nuclear Advance Act link in the chat, and I put a corrected study on security dangers of SM and our small modular magical mythical nuclear reactors. The S870, the first 3 pages are a fire bill funding fire research for 4 years. And that's what passed the Senate originally. The House added the 95-page Nuclear Advance Act to it and then passed it together. So now it's back at the Senate. So as we're opposing S870, if you're going to work on this, please clarify that you want to remove Division B from get the Nuclear Advance Act off. We don't really want to stop fire safety and funding.
So, speaking of SMRs, there's a question, are we actually going to get advanced reactors? There's SMRs, there's the thorium, there's sodium, there are other kinds of reactors. Are they actually better than what we have now? Are they actually better for the waste? Are they actually... And my question, my perennial question actually is, are we ever really going to see any electricity generated from any of them? Or is this just a money and power grab? Discuss. Gordon had his hand up first.
I'm going to have to cut out shortly because I have other things that I must do. But I just wanted to say that, yeah, it's largely a scam. Essentially, it is a scam. And I'm afraid they're leading us down a dead-end path. It's not going to be successful at all. It's going to be exorbitantly expensive. The bankers have already said, as I mentioned to you, unfortunately, I don't have that link to put into the chat, but the bankers have already said there's no way we're going to fund this. And so I believe that it's the industry itself trying to keep itself alive. That we have a Canadian humorist called Stephen Leacock who wrote a lot of funny books. And one of the sentences in the Stephen Leacock story is he threw himself upon his horse and rode off madly in all directions. And that's what the nuclear industry is doing. They're dredging up every single idea that has come forward 50 and 60 years ago in reactors that were tried and were never successfully commercialized. And now they're saying, oh, we have thorium reactors, we have molten salt reactors, we have liquid sodium reactors, and so on. None of them have been successful, and there's a very good reason why they haven't been successful. So I'll just say to you that my personal opinion is that it is a big scam, but unfortunately, our politicians are not scientists, and they are easily persuaded by people who seem to know what they're talking about and who exceed them in academic qualifications. And so they're just wrapping these politicians around their little finger. And of course, as was said before, and it certainly is true, that the war machine is really what started the whole ball rolling and which is still driving it forward. And what that has done, the war machine has given them unprecedented access. They can walk into any congressional office and talk to anybody they like almost any time. People who represent real alternatives like renewables and so on, they don't have that kind of access. So it's the access to the political structures. The industry is setting its own policy, and they are grabbing huge chunks of public money. And it's really ultimately not going to go anywhere, in my opinion, on a commercial level. Even the countries that have signed, you know, that 22 countries who signed the tripling of nuclear by 2050, if you look at them, all the rich countries are sellers of nuclear reactors who are trying to drum up business. And all the poor countries, people like Bolivia and places like that, they don't have the money to build these reactors. Even the small modular reactors, they'd have to be given handouts to be able to build them. So it's a way of siphoning money, even more money, out of the public coffers and putting it into something which is really only for the benefit of one industry and is not going to solve the climate crisis at all. In fact, I don't think it's going to make a dent in the climate crisis. But I'm sorry I can't stay on longer, but I do think it's a very important endeavor we're undertaking. And the San Onofre situation is very perplexing and exasperating in itself and deserves all the treatment and attention that it has been getting. But it's part of a much larger picture, and the larger picture is just as bleak, just as dismal.
Thanks, Gordon.
What a cheerful
Good
thought.
time.
The fact of the matter is that, you know, renewables are beating the pants off nuclear. And even the International Energy Agency has stated clearly that in the next 5 years, worldwide, over 90% of all new electrical installations, generating installations, over 90% of them are going to be renewable. So, you know, whether the nuclear industry likes it or not, the actual solutions are plowing forward, and beating the pants off nuclear. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Gordon.
Gordon.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Special
Gordon.
thank you to Jim and Mary Beth. You've done the whole world a wonderful service by making this very good movie. It's excellent.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Gordon.
Thank you for being in it.
Bye-bye.
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 Bye, Gordon.
I have a very short answer to that, which again, Tim Judson from NEARS is a great researcher. He found that when the question was, okay, so even if all of the proposed small modular reactors that are being touted now were to get built, it would be less electricity than one reactor, one of the current size reactors. That all the gigawatts to the megawatts don't add up to much after all the amount of money it would take.
Wow.
And I just wanted, that's amazing. I just wanted to mention that the industry is also depending on the energy requirements of their massive surveillance that our dear governments are imposing on all of us. They require a lot of energy.
Not to mention all the AI installations. that are-
So that's another what goad for their pushing for all of this stuff. I don't know how they would keep it going with wind power and solar.
Donna.
Well, I know that, it's in the news now about AI, but the California Independent System Operator said the reason we have a higher demand is because of the policy of mandating all electric vehicles. That is what's driving the demand for more energy. That's
That's
going
another
to
one.
require tripling the number of transmission lines we have. What was the other thing? I think and anyway, it's which is not very viable, and they're going to need to do something better than the batteries they're using. Those only last 4 hours, so you need that long durable storage, and there's been manufacturing problems unresolved that these since I've lived in Monterey, which is where I moved to, I'm right by the bay, at Moss Landing, they've already had 4 battery fires in just a couple of years. So there's still kinks to work out that are major problems. And my concern is with the way Governor Newsom is driving this, we're going to be set up for blackouts because of this. He's putting the cars before the horse, or whatever that expression is.
All right, so I think we're probably winding down. So this will be our last question, and it's on the dumping at Fukushima into the ocean. To remind us that this is a worldwide problem and that the contamination is forever. Who wants to talk about what's going on at Fukushima and just bring people up to speed?
Well, I'll just begin it. I was horrified to see recently that they in Japan are in building schools in Fukushima, brand new schools, and that they want to encourage families to come back and live there, and that and just pretend that there's no more radiation, or that it's acceptable, the levels that are there. So it's astounding to me the amount of cover-up that they blatantly did with Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island and Fukushima. It just is, it's flabbergasted.
They're doing it everywhere. They're doing it here. They're doing it all over. We have a major cover-up of hiding radiation. State, local, federal level, major cover-up that we don't have So in terms of this Fukushima plan where they're dumping, they're claiming they can clean up some of it. I think Greenpeace International is doing a good job of reporting on, what's going on with that water. I would recommend people take a look at that. But even right after Fukushima, there was bluefin tuna in San Diego that had more cesium than they expected. Okay. And then in what city is it? Corona del Mar, which is in Orange County in California, the kelp was measuring cesium from Fukushima.
Mhm.
So it's here, and then it's traveled through the air to other states. So it's everywhere. But we don't even know what we have in this country, let alone that. But that's the pattern of the nuclear industry, to hide the radiation, and everybody's living in this nuclear stew, and we don't even know it. There's a person I know in Tahoe, and he bought a Geiger counter, and he was getting high readings on his Geiger counter inside his house. It turned out that the wood he was burning from his land was highly radioactive. So, and the state of California used to provide some information, and they no longer provide that on their website about radiation levels. So we've got a major cover-up problem here, as well as, elsewhere, Japan, all of it.
I wanted to just bring up that in a couple of weeks, there's going to be a congressional briefing on food, what to do about food contamination by radioactivity. And we'll have information about that on our website, sanonofresyndrome.com. And Cindy's involved with that too. So that should be very interesting.
Yes, thanks for mentioning it. Oh, and Mary Beth and Jim, if you could also tell people how they can see the film after tonight.
SanOnofreSyndrome.com. Just go to the website and click. The video on demand will be available. It'll be $4.99, but it'll be available from now on online for anybody's convenience. And we've got loads of other screenings, in-person screenings scheduled also that you can find out about on the website. And we really would like everybody to consider hosting a screening in your area, because that's how when people get together in person, there's a real energy that's that builds, and then action can be taken.
All right, great. So thank you. Thanks to all of our speakers. Rose, thank you. Mary Beth and Jim, thank you. Diane, thank you. Donna, thank you. And Gordon, thank you, even though he had to leave.
Great job monitoring, Cindy. You did a great job.
Yeah, thank you.
And I'm grateful
Cindy,
for the wonderful questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them. There were a number of questions, but there were also a number of very helpful comments, and we tried to move some of those links into the chat and share with everyone that way. So I think now if Mary Beth and Jim would like to conclude, that would be good.
Go ahead.
well, I just wanted to, I already said that I want to urge you to encourage others to watch the film. It's an easy way for people to get somewhat informed about what's happening, which is off the radar in many. I keep hearing this from people who watch it. Oh, everybody should see that because nobody knows about this. So, and this, even though this is a massive problem, we believe that if enough people are aware and activated from a high ethical and technological point of view, we can avoid disaster. And there's nothing certain, of course, but we can all try.
So I wanted to double check if and how this recording of this webinar will be available to view after. I don't know if Mike, you know?
Yes, well, and it has been recorded. We will edit it and try to get it out to all the people that registered for the webinar and actually were registered to see the film, even if they didn't watch it or actually attended tonight's panel. We will try to send out within a couple weeks a recording of this. And so I would just really love to thank Jim and Mary Beth for the film. It is just wonderful. It covers so many things that are so relevant to this topic. Like to thank Cindy and all of our panelists for joining us tonight. And also just thank everybody that signed up to watch the film, to sign up to be on the or watch the panel. We really need your help. We need everybody to spread the word. We are getting outgunned and outcharmed by the nuclear industry. They're spending so much money to buy Congress, by our local legislators, even local counties are being bought off by the nuclear industry for these SMRs. It is just, we need to combat it with people power. So please share with your friends, your family, your colleagues, anybody that you possibly can. Share the good news about that nuclear is not the answer to anything. Thank you very much. And thanks everybody for joining us this evening.
Down with
You.
crackpot nuclearism.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night. Thank you, Mike.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Mike, can we put this on our website too? The
Yes.
recording?
Yes, we'll do that. And so
Okay,
I'm going
great.
to end the webinar right now, and let's talk offline if we need to.